We now return to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute, the radio show discussing the honest truth about Illinois policy and politics. Here's AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Cole Lauterbach, reporter for the Illinois News Network, on this edition of Illinois Rising. And Cole, Governor Rauner has established a goal of trying to reduce the Illinois state prison population by 25% by the year 2025, so essentially over the next decade. We've got an overcrowding problem in Illinois state prisons, and over the last 30 years, we've seen inmate population increase by roughly 182% in Illinois, while the population grew only by about 12% over the same period. Much of the increase, it relates to nonviolent drug offenders and thieves, if you will, people who've committed theft,
right,
in our prisons. And so the question is, how do we go about reducing the prison population while also protecting society from predators, even people that become predators because of their other destructive behavior? And it's a real balancing test.
Well, and the thing is, too, is that when you hear about people going to jail, they come out, and today, instead of being rehabilitated, they come out as better criminals. And that is one of the biggest issues of having such a large population in prisons.
Right, the recidivism issue. Well, somebody who's put a lot of study into these issues and rethinking criminal justice is Lauren Crisai. She is the Director of Criminal Justice Reform at the Reason Foundation, and Lauren joins us now. Thanks for joining us, Lauren. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Well, so with the goal that Governor Rauner set forward in Illinois here, what are some suggestions from your research you think the General Assembly and the governor should take under consideration to reduce the prison population while not negatively impacting public safety?
Well, there are a lot of things that Illinois can do. Surprisingly, Illinois is kind of behind even some southern states that have been reforming the criminal justice system, their sentencing laws over the past few years. But, the first place to start, I think, is to look at Class 4 felony offenses. These are the lowest level felony offenses. These are, for drug possession, petty theft, retail theft, things like that. Illinois still has very punitive penalties for these sorts of offenses. So in the brief that we published with Illinois Policy Institute, that's where we say that the commission needs to look out first, because these are the types of people who make up the majority of admissions to prison. They're not staying in prison for very long, but they're just kind of like going in a revolving door. Like, they're coming in, they're going back out, they're coming back in again. And it's just clear that the way that we're punishing these types of offenders just isn't working.
Lauren, you say, the Class 4 felony offenders, a large amount is retail theft, drug offenses. What can we do to lower the amount of the qualification for a Class 4 felony? Because I know other states have changed this, and it's reduced their population, inmate population, by quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, in Illinois, the threshold for felony theft is still remarkably low. It's only set at $500. So you have to steal, something that's worth $500. And this was set actually in 2013, but originally it was set at $300 back in the 1980s. So when someone was stealing something that was worth $300 in the 1980s, it was worth a lot more than, $300 is today. And it was raised just very, arbitrarily, I think, to $500. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. There are a whole lot of things that cost, more than $500 that people take all the time. And I'm not excusing these types of offenses, but I think that, when you steal something that's $500, does that necessarily need to be punished with prison time? I don't think so. So, there are some other states, even neighboring states to Illinois, that have significantly higher felony thresholds, theft thresholds. Like Wisconsin, we talk about in our policy brief, their felony theft threshold is $2,500. They have about the same level of theft that Illinois does. So it shows that it is possible to raise the felony theft level without seeing increases in felony theft. Most people who are going to commit these types of offenses don't really follow the legislature on a day-to-day basis, so they're not going to be looking for, they increased the felony theft threshold, now I can steal way more. That's just not really how it works. So I think that, if we're talking about prioritizing public safety, I think that the punishment that we're doling out in Illinois needs to be more proportionate to the offense. And these people that we're locking up and charging and convicting of felonies, I think, can be handled in a different way.
Now, as it pertains to drug offenses, I recently spoke with the FOP president in Chicago, Dean Angelo, and the issue is right now Chicago is trending to have the fewest number of drug arrests since the Nixon administration. I asked him if that was good news or bad news. And he said it was bad news because what it really indicates that's happening in Chicago is essentially the police standing down and the drug trade run by the gangs allowed to progress without interaction from police, without essentially policing. What's your reaction to that? Now, I know that's focused on the drug dealers and the gang side of it, but what's your reaction to that in terms of how you message to the public, reducing the offense or treating drug users differently than perhaps they're treated right now under Illinois law will enhance public safety while not and not compromise policing as it pertains to dealing with street gangs?
Yeah, I don't really see arresting fewer people for drug possession as a bad thing. I think, from a libertarian perspective, ideally we wouldn't really be arresting our way out of this drug use problem at all. So I think that when we're talking about people who are just possessing drugs, we're talking about people who are using it for their own personal use. Right now, the way that Illinois treats those people is that we lock them up and charge them with felonies. And other states, even southern states, are moving away from that model. And in Utah, I know that's not a southern state, but it's a conservative state. They recently made, possession of low amounts of drugs a misdemeanor offense. In Illinois, possession of any amount of certain controlled substances is a felony. In other southern states, they've done similar things. In South Carolina, they made possession of small amounts of drugs a misdemeanor as well. So when you have conservative states like South Carolina and Utah making these types of offenses misdemeanors instead of felonies, and Illinois still has these harsh penalties on the books, you got to start to wonder, why is that?
Well,
I don't really think there's a good public safety reason for those types of penalties.
With respect to that, small amounts, decriminalizing them or treating them less severely than Illinois does, is there a distinction to be made between, say, marijuana and heroin?
Well, I think that from a libertarian perspective, I would say no. I just don't. There's no data to back up, arresting and throwing people in jail for possession of these offenses has a public safety benefit. No data supports that type of claim. So, throwing people in jail who have addiction issues, marijuana obviously isn't as harmful as these other drugs, but still, I think that traditionally our response has been similar, and I don't think that we should, do different levels of enforcement for different kinds of drugs because it doesn't have any data to back up that will positively improve public safety in any way. It'll just take some drug offenders who have addictions to certain types of substances and charge them differently than people who are addicted to other types of substances. And I don't think that makes any sense logically or from a public safety perspective to treat different offenders differently.
Lauren, what's your reception via public opinion on this matter? Because this is something that you can't really draw down partisan lines in respect to lowering the prison population. Because people still want to be, conservative states still want to be tough on crime. They don't want to be seen as soft on the criminal element in their state. But then again, at the same time, they don't want to have these massive prison states that are costing tens of thousands of dollars per inmate to house, and then only to have them come out as more, refined criminals, not, in a public citizen that's going to contribute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that this is one of the few bipartisan issues that we're seeing in a number of different states. And at the federal level, although I think that the federal level, they're kind of duking it out right now as far as what specific reforms that they want to enact. But, traditionally we've seen over the past few years a number of conservative states who have had these overcrowded prisons and budget problems re-examine how they sentence certain types of offenders, and they've realized, like, look, there are some people in prison that don't belong there. We're being tough on crime, sure, but are we being smart on crime? I think is something that they're starting to ask themselves, and they're realizing that when they're looking at the types of offenders that are in prison, who are receiving, years in prison, sometimes decades or even life in prison for nonviolent offenses, they're starting to say, look, this isn't necessarily being smart on crime. People, public safety is not enhanced when we're throwing these types of offenders in prison. And so they're starting to scale back some of these types of offenses or sentences for these types of offenses, and they're not seeing an increase in violent crime in their states. So I think it shows that, if conservative southern states with these bloated prison populations are able to scale back their prison populations without impacting public safety, Illinois can certainly do the same.
All right. She is Lauren Crisai, Director of Criminal Justice Reform at the Reason Foundation. Lauren, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.